Hello, everyone. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the D87 Student and Community Projects Coordinator. So happy that you could join us for this important talk today. I'm so excited to welcome my friend Christopher Willard back to GPS. It's been a while. We'll be talking about his book, College Mental Health 101, the journey that high school students and college students may take. That may be your child, it may be someone that you work with or someone that you know. And as with every GPS program, everybody is welcome here. Our ask of you all is to please share this resource because everybody is welcome. So thank you for the gift of your time. I want to mention very quickly some of the upcoming programs that are happening in January, and you'll want to definitely get out a pen and pencil. To kick off January, we're welcoming Gretchen Rubin. She will be in conversation with Dr. Laurie Santos. Gretchen Rubin has a new book called Secrets of Adulthood. And Dr. Laurie Santos is a professor who teaches at Yale, and she'll be talking about the Happiness Project and her work there. So it should be an interesting conversation on the 8th, noon and 7 p.m. Another friend of ours that is coming back is Dr. Ken Ginsberg. He will be talking about his new book, Lighthouse Parenting, for children, parents of children 8 to 18. How can we guide them? It's kind of a continuation of what we're going to be talking about today, guiding them to develop independence and coping skills to navigate their own journey. So you want to come back on January 13th at noon and 7. Then a program that we don't always go to, but it's always very popular when we do, we'll be talking about how to empower our athletes and how do we help them foster confidence for their peak performance. Coming back is Kristen Jones. She'll be with us on January 21 at noon and 7 p.m. Her book is called Raising Empowered Athlete. And then we will conclude the month. Jenny Anderson has a very important book called The Disengaged Teen. Her co-author, Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop, will be together for this virtual program on Tuesday, January 27th, noon and 7. Checked out, stressed out, moving kids from disengagement to drive. So you can see there's a theme here. We're all about empowering parents, empowering children, inspiring and informing. And I'm so grateful that you're here. I'm also grateful to Melissa Babbitt. She is the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning at Glenbard, and she has the introductions. So Melissa, take it away.
Thank you, Gilda. So happy to be here today. Dr. Christopher Willard is a clinical psychologist, prolific author, and noted educational consultant based in Boston. He has been practicing meditation for over 2 decades and has led hundreds of workshops worldwide, receiving invitations from over 24 countries. He's a faculty member at Harvard Medical School and serves on the board of directors at the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy. He is also president of the Mindfulness and Education Network. He has presented at TEDx conferences, and his thoughts have been featured in various publications, including the New York Times and the Washington Post. He has developed several sets of innovative cards and therapeutic games that are available in over 10 languages. Dr. Willard is the author of several books, including Child's Mind, Growing Up Mindful, Raising Resilience, and 8 other books for parents, professionals, and children. His latest book, College Mental Health 101, a survival guide for students, parents, and professionals, provides a comprehensive and hopeful look at managing mental health for all stakeholders, and we are thrilled to welcome him back to the GPS Parent Series today.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you, Jerica and Gilda. Thank you so much for having me back. It is such a wonderful series. Just looking at the other speakers you have, I'm like I gotta start tuning in to more of these. Such a wonderful resource that you all create. And I've got to update my bio. I just wanted to thank you again. And Gilda and I, we were kind of kibitzing before we began about the last time I was there. I think it was like the 10th and 11th of March 2020. And if you remember, it was Friday the 13th that the world shut down and the flight out to Chicago seemed normal, and the flight back, everyone's wearing masks and gloves. And I get back and I pick up my phone and it's just all, this is canceled, this is canceled, this is canceled, this is canceled. So the world is different, and here we are online, hopefully reaching more people. And talking actually about some of the ways that the pandemic has impacted all of us and has really impacted our kids too, and their mental health and their development. So let me make sure I've got my slideshow up and running. So yeah, I'm excited to be sharing this topic, which is really near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons. One is that I worked for many years directly in college mental health. at a college counseling mental health center at Tufts University. And then I continue, a really big part of my practice is working with families, working with students, consulting about these times that are promised to be the best years of your life, right? This is what we tell our kids so often when they're heading off, or that they are getting that message. And then what we know is that so many of them are struggling more than ever before. And I've got some slides about the bad news, and I've got some slides also about the good news. But what I really want to give you are some takeaways that are going to be hopefully helpful to you. So part of this comes out of my own story. Grew up here outside of Boston, went to an elite East Coast university, and had 3 solid years, and then just kind of crumbled, struggling with depression, struggling with anxiety, struggling with substance abuse. And this was the picture my parents had on the bulletin board during those difficult years. And I took a couple of years off from college to kind of find myself or get my stuff together, however you might want to put that. And during that time, 2 years, it was trying different therapists. It was my parents suggesting I take classes or do this or that, or is it this diagnosis, or what is it that's going on? It took a couple of years. I finally did pull some things together. Got kind of some of my mental health challenges under control. I've now been clean and sober for multiple decades at this point in my life, and went back and finished my degree, first in English, and then went back to school a couple of years later to become a psychologist, which is what I am now, in addition to the other things in the lovely bio that I got. I'm also a very fast talker, as you probably have noticed too, so I'll try to be aware of that as well. So that's me, and I always kind of wanted to then help young people, and I always wanted to be a writer, and I feel so grateful I've been able to combine those couple of things over the years in my work. So I wrote this book with 2 friends of mine, who I also want to shout out and mention they're also worth seeking out to. My friend Blaise Aguirre, who's a psychiatrist who grew up in South Africa, and then came to the US for undergrad and medical school. My friend Chelsea Green, who's a social worker, a little bit younger than me, but we also went to the same university. And kind of connected that way through mentoring her. And we put this book together for young folks, because we all really care about it. So what we did is we interviewed just like hundreds of kids and parents and therapists and professionals and college counselors and folks in high school and college and all over, and then tried to answer the most common questions. So the book is really organized, and I'll organize the talk this way too, just as like a few, I won't do a few hundred questions. The book is a few hundred questions, but just trying to answer questions. And what I want to say is that the book is less an answer to questions than encouraging you to explore these questions. There's not necessarily a right or a wrong answer, but these are just questions I want you to consider a little bit. So I'll start with some of the bad news that some of us are aware of, and especially kind of in the post-pandemic times, right? We know, unfortunately, suicide rates are going up. An enormous percentage of college students are experiencing significant mental health issues. A lot of young adults don't seek treatment. That's higher in kind of more marginalized groups. Part of this is because a lot of mental health issues just begin around this age, but a lot of things make that worse. We'll talk about that too. 64% of folks who are leaving college is because of a mental health issue. We know that sexual assault continues to be a big issue. And an amazing book by, oh my gosh, who's the Howard Gardner and one of his colleagues, the Theory of Multiple Intelligences guy, about college students. They found that the #1 issue that students raised from colleges was mental health as the most important campus issue. So this is some of the bad news. And I never like to share bad news without also some good news. There's a lot less stigma than there used to be. I think this can be good and bad in some ways, but so many more young people are talking very openly about mental health challenges, encouraging each other to seek out mental health help and support therapy, to talk openly about this. This is true across all demographic groups, even though stigma still particularly exists in some pockets. There's a lot better care than there was in the past. There's more medications that are helpful. There's more mental health trainings that my wife is a professor. She gets a little bit of, kind of red flags to look out for. Certainly in high schools, there's a little bit more awareness of what's going on with young people in terms of why they might be struggling. A lot of schools are hiring more staff. There's still more needed, but there's a lot more out there. And one thing that I have found really inspiring, and I'm just back from a conference actually last week in Florida, where I met folks from Active Minds, which is one of the many student activist groups that's trying to do a lot of activism around mental health awareness, destigmatizing, and advocating for more resources in both high schools and colleges. So when I go and I speak in schools, often it's the Active Minds chapter, the wonderful young adults and teenagers who end up doing the introducing me. And it's so wonderful to then take a bit of time to work with them around what are the changes they want in their school, and kind of do a little consultation with them has been incredible. So just, we have good news and bad news, I guess is what I want to say. And then thinking a little bit, we can think, what advice would you offer your 18-year-old self? But then realizing like how relevant is that in this day and age? Things have changed so much. Social media and phones and screens, and not just calculators, but AI and all of these things have really impacted stuff. So what else are we seeing? We think of this as a time of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And we've got good news and bad news on this, right? Kids are having less sex and fewer intimate relationships is kind of interesting. In general, they're doing fewer drugs and drinking a little bit less. But what we're seeing is a skew, and there is a little bit more marijuana use. And then people that are drinking, as we probably know, there's a lot more students who are not drinking, but those who are drinking more, right? So these are things to consider. Students are going out less, like they're kind of hanging out in their dorms a little bit more. And of course, part of that is because of screens just going way up, right? We know that, we worry about that. That could be its own 10-hour talk and workshop or something. So what is it that's happening? Right? I think some of us have seen variations on this quote. I couldn't quite source it, but one of the issues is that our kids are raised in captivity and we release them into the wild, oftentimes, kind of overprotecting them. And then they go into college with kind of all the rights of adulthood and yet only a few of the responsibilities. And that's not necessarily a great combination. So that's kind of a part of it. And what I like about speaking to groups like this is that there are such, parents and educators and adults in these kids' lives who are doing great work preparing these kids academically. And I'm just hoping to help you find some ways to shore up to help your kids more emotionally get ready. And that's why I think I called the talk something like emotional college prep or something like that. So why do kids have these issues? I'm going to kind of glaze over this a little bit. I think a lot about what we call the biopsychosocial model of what creates mental illness or what creates mental health, right? So there's the biological stuff, genetics, different kinds of issues, medical issues, diet, fitness, sleep. I remember when I first was working at Tufts saying to a supervisor, all these kids are coming in depressed, and there's a fair amount of self-diagnosis. We can talk about that goes on too. And I realized that if I told them to get some sleep and a little exercise and eat 3 meals a day, like they all feel better. But I feel like I'm their grandmother, saying that. And she was like, it's true, Chris, but you're not their grandmother. And that's probably why they listen to you. And of course, there's a lot more than they need than just, sleep and exercise and things like that and irregular meals. But these things go out the window for kids when they've been so used to. We forget even kids that don't have a lot of structure, they're often handed a couple meals a day at school or by their parents. They're getting exercise because of PE class or playing varsity sports. Their social life is built in. Someone's telling them to go to sleep more often than not. They have to wake up at the same time every day, most of them, to go to school. These sort of basics of sleep hygiene and just basic foundation of bodily care goes out the window. And then you think about someone who's depressed and it's hard to eat, or they're anxious and it's embarrassing to go to the gym, or I'm self-conscious about going to the cafeteria by myself, or all of these struggles, or you have executive function challenges, ADHD or something like that, and remembering what time to eat when someone's not telling you to, or to go to the gym, or to learn how to organize your schedule is really challenging, right? And especially, I find, maybe it's who gets referred to me, but especially for young men and boys whose executive functions are not quite as developed as they are for our female identified kiddos. So that plays a role. Psychological stuff plays a role, and the social experiences that they've had. And that includes this stuff around screens too, that's played an impact in how they feel about themselves, their mental health. I mean, I think it's, just about every week, it seems like another study is coming out. I'm sure many of us have read John Haidt's fantastic book, The Anxious Generation. So these are some of the things that are contributing to some of the challenges. And yet these are also things that we can do something about, right? We can work on the biological side of it, help them take care of their bodies, right? I kind of mentioned that a little bit. Remember to take their medications, kind of thinking a little bit psychologically. We'll talk about some cognitive distortions and ways to manage perfectionism and attitudes and constant comparison. And then in therapy and other places, also working through things like, some of the difficult experiences they've had, right? I mentioned some of the traumas that students experience when they're in college, but so many students have had traumatic experiences back home, whether it's sexual assault or other kinds of violence or school-related traumas or illness, or all kinds of things have maybe impacted them, including things like, racism, identity markers, things like that. And of course, the pandemic, right, that we kind of led off with, right? Those years of isolation, years of underdeveloped social skills, years of just interacting with screens that were really maybe not so helpful. And then this kind of funny thing around self-diagnosis, that this is one of the, I think, what cuts both ways about destigmatization. And I see this around the world. I was in Egypt and I was sort of shocked at all these kids talking to me very openly about their mental health challenges. It really blew up my stereotypes, but realizing social media has done an amazing job of destigmatizing mental health issues, but has also created this kind of epidemic of self-diagnosis, of the sort of like, if you've ever, felt nervous at a party, which we all do, it's social anxiety. If you've ever had your mind wander while you're reading a book, you must have ADD, right? And how do we work with that? And social media makes that worse. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but that's a part of these challenges, or a misdiagnosis. Someone comes in self-diagnosed with anxiety, but actually a professional can see, oh, this is maybe actually depression that's going on, or this is ADHD that's going on, and not maybe that kind of self-diagnosis that tends to happen. So this is some of the challenges and some of what's creating some of this too. So this is the age, kind of on a technical level, we call this emerging adulthood. And it's got this kind of in-between stuff, still figuring out their identity. This is why I love working with college-age kids, and kids kind of launching, and young adults. They're still figuring out who they are, and that is so exciting. But it also leads to maybe some not great judgment, because the prefrontal lobes aren't entirely developed in terms of choices and decisions and self-care and things like that. But it also has these great kinds of opportunities. So just wanting to kind of note this. These are some of the other challenges, I think, that go along in this time too. But what I wanted to mostly stick with today is kind of getting to some of the questions that are really common. And I like to organize this. We organize some of the book. I actually have a free download. I can send it to folks if you email me or go to my website, about kind of how to think about heading off to college from where we are now, and then kind of thinking through kind of sort of spring of junior year into fall of senior year, right? What are the things that you want to do? senior spring, senior summer, and then arrival at school. And then we'll talk about managing with crises at school as well. So thinking about these kinds of things, my slides have a mind of their own. I don't know quite, I must have it set to auto jump ahead. I apologize. Right. Spring junior year, fall senior year as we're approaching it. And I want to say nothing is too late either if your kiddo is a senior. But this is when we start to think about, are there accommodations that are maybe going to be needed, certainly for SATs and ACTs, and starting to talk to treatment team, therapists, school social workers, counselors, that kind of thing, support network about this process. Because the process itself is incredibly stressful, right? The whole junior year thing, it's real. Like, it's a ton of work. You got SATs, everyone else's anxiety is going up. We know that stress and anxiety are contagious. My friends are talking about this. Oh my gosh, right? The seniors are getting in, right? They're getting rejected, all of those things, right? So that's all going up, and starting to think, okay, like just as a regular college search too, and gap year search for that matter, right? What are the colleges? What are the characteristics? Looking a little bit, asking about the resources, even though we all know the college process, right? It's like, we're a big school, but we're a small school. We're in the country, but we're also close to the city. And right, they all give us those lines of being everything for everyone. And we have so many resources, but also that, we can start to learn how to read between the lines of some of that. But so some of the questions, I think, about how do we decide, I think, these things like, if I've got mental health challenges, right, or if I think I might, or if I'm transferring even, right, do I pick a big school or a small school, urban, suburban, or rural? And these are just the questions I want you to think about. Again, I don't have answers. I have responses, not answers, I guess I would say. Big school can be great because there's some anonymity. There's probably more resources at a big school. On the flip side, there's probably bureaucracy at a big school, right? At a small school, maybe the resources are easier to access, but at the same time, it's a small environment. If you're struggling, you don't want everyone to know your business or something like that, right? It's just, what are you comfortable with? What do you feel like will be most supportive? Urban, suburban, or rural. Again, urban schools might have certain resources available to, people that look like you in terms of identity or gender identity, or resources in terms of your ethnic background or racial background, more common in an urban area than a rural area, right? But they're also, might not be as much of a campus life in the same way as a more suburban or rural school, where it's more kind of the campus is where things are happening, right? So these are things to think about, right? The rural school probably has clinicians on campus, but then it's probably really hard to find anyone off campus or find a prescriber a little bit further away, right? These are just things, not right or wrong, but just, how does this relate to the mental health challenges that we might be facing? Near from home or far from home? Again, in-state or out of state. Some kids really need to get away and reinvent themselves. Others, that's a little riskier. Many states, you can see your therapist across state lines. There's a compact about that, but not every state is a part of it. I'm in Massachusetts. We're a holdout state. I don't know why, but that's what's happening for Massachusetts. Right? Other states, that's not an issue. Definitely prescribing across state lines. Certain medications and classes of medications cannot be prescribed across state lines and can be a real headache. It's a headache enough if you have a kid on stimulant medication to get that filled, as probably a lot of us know. It's even more difficult to do that kind of thing across state lines, right? So these are things to consider, right? Keep the resources from home or look a little further away. Public universities, private universities and colleges, right? Public, save a lot of money, although not that that's cheap either, right? Private university, expensive, but probably has all the resources on campus. You probably get for your $90,000, $100,000 a year executive function coaches and a prescriber and a good accommodations office and disabilities office and therapists and stuff like that. But if you don't like them, you're paying a lot of money and then you're going off campus, right? So, you want to see like if it's a fit or not. And even the private universities, Sometimes they say you only get 10 sessions anyway. So maybe you want to go public university and think, okay, I'll get my mental health services a la carte because there'll be a lot more money. I'll find them out in the community because it's $30,000 less, but it's still an outrageous amount of money. And also, will financial aid cover any of these kinds of expenses? Will insurance, can student insurance be used? These questions. Housing, in terms of accommodations. Someone I interviewed for the book who's been a speaker at GPS said, not everyone gets, gluten-free kitchen and a puppy and a single on campus, right? There's only so many housing accommodations that can be made. But it's something just to think about. It's pretty unlikely to get major housing accommodations anywhere. And then these questions about like part-time, full-time, gap year, I think are important. I am a huge believer in gap years. I took 2 in the middle of college. I probably, in retrospect, wish I'd taken 1 before I started college and let my prefrontal cortex grow a little bit more, and had some cool adventures, as one of the deans from Penn who we interviewed suggested. It's like you'll be older and wiser and have cool stories and appreciate, I think, the education in a different way too. So I'm always a booster of gap years. I also think full-time, ironically, is often easier than part-time because you're with a cohort of other people that's kind of pulling through at the same time. And that momentum of peers can be helpful at a residential college or university. So these are some things to think about. Another question that comes up a lot, we interviewed a lot of admissions officers, college counselors. Should I mention my mental health issues in my admissions interview or essay? And we got different answers. I think the main takeaway we ended up with was mention it if it feels really relevant. If it's like sophomore year, 1 semester, your grades were much lower, you can say, yeah, I was really dealing with anxiety or a diagnosis of depression and figured a lot of stuff out, and then things got better, but they need to see that they got better. The other thing I think that colleges are worried about, even though we have the Americans with Disabilities Act and no one is supposed to discriminate, is the reality is that probably is happening even at the unconscious level. So that one thing we admissions officers said to us was, if someone says, I had anxiety and now I'm totally fine and everything's great, that's a red flag, right? If you say, I had some anxiety and I went to therapy and I still go to therapy and I know what my red flags are and here's how I would adapt in college, then they're like, okay, this is someone who gets that this could be a journey and really is not in denial about anything. And that's the way to write that essay or mention, something that might be on that transcript that is worrisome in some way. And then interviews, they're not really, nothing's going back to anybody, certainly on a tour. In an interview, you might just, not maybe mention it unless they're asking more specifically and give a similar answer to the essay. But on a tour or maybe a kind of anonymous call to the admissions office or to the counseling office at school, you might want to ask about what resources are available, but not necessarily lead with that stuff. Again, no one's supposed to discriminate. We worry about that happening still. So these are some of the kind of things that we heard from students and other folks too, in terms of some of those questions as well. And of course, as I said, just calling into the school, right? Asking, maybe not the admissions office, but call the college counseling center. Check out the website. Does student insurance cover it? How many sessions, right? These are the kinds of questions to start to think about. And again, this is a handout I'm happy to send people if you're interested in starting to think this through a little bit. If there's not a lot of resources on campus, or if they need a specialist, eating disorders and substance abuse, kind of mostly needing specialists, like, do they have people they work with off campus? Can you keep your insurance if you go on leave? This is, I think, a really important question. I think there were some lawsuits about this, in fact, if I recall. So these are some questions to start to think about. And then looking for and advocating for accommodations. This starts to happen a little bit more kind of senior spring, but I'm jumping ahead a little bit. but it really works differently than it does in public school. It works similar to how it works in private school. And a confusion that often takes place is, oh, if I go to public university, I'll get public school accommodations. And that's not, in fact, the case, right? It's still basically like private school level of accommodations, which is kind of reasonable accommodations. Things like extended time, extensions and incompletes, which often my wife is grading papers in the next room and talking about all of the kids asking for extensions with the full knowledge that half of them will probably never end up getting those extensions and incompletes done. That is to me anyway, and having been on the counseling side of it and on the student side of it 25 years ago, asking for extensions can just be a hole that kids never actually dig themselves out of. So being really careful about that, but that is of course an option. Sometimes note takers and assistive technologies, sometimes alternative formats. Sometimes schools have executive function assistants. Sometimes they'll have flexible attendance policies, but these are not things that are guaranteed particularly. Sometimes you can ask for alternative assignments. And this is actually something a student I worked with who kind of struggled at 2 schools before he transferred to a very small, he went to Emerson, a small college here in Boston, after a couple of state schools where he just couldn't, he's taking these giant classes, very bureaucratic. And at Emerson, he's a young man with a lot of depression and dyslexia, just struggled with writing. And his professors were like, you can do an oral exam. Just come in and tell me everything you know about the topic, right? So even though, some people might think a public university might be easier in some ways, is why he picked it, than a private one, there was a little more flexibility for the amount of money his parents were paying in a way that was helpful. And actually, there's just an article in the Times the other day about, because of AI, will everyone now go back to oral exams? But that's another question entirely. Haverford College has a great explanation of how accommodations work in college. So I recommend checking that out again. I'm happy to share this with folks, but this is what you want to think about. It's a different philosophy than it is in a public school, right? In a public school, students are entitled to graduate from high school with accommodations, right? Up to age 20, 21 in some states even. And the qualified person can't be discriminated against, but they're entitled to be able to get what they need to be able to graduate. In college, it's just that they won't be discriminated against, right? And they'll have access to the academic programs and services, but not an entitlement to those, right? So it's a very different philosophy and very different access. And that can be really challenging for a lot of families to figure out how they navigate those accommodations, whether it's for mental health issues, whether it's for attention deficits, neurodiversity, mental health, dyslexia, other kinds of learning issues. It's just a really different process. There's some folks that have done some great writing on that too. I'm happy to try to find those footnotes for folks too. And getting accommodations, Catherine Steiner-Adair's one of the great folks I talked to. She was saying that the best thing about college is that it's a restart, and one of the worst things is that it's a restart, and that so many students, I think, head out thinking, I'm going to do this without accommodations. I'm going to do this without my therapist. I'm going to try it, just on my own. I'm going to let go of therapy, let go of medication, let go of accommodations. I'm a whole new me, and then fall flat, if not worse than flat. And so a lot of my work that will kind of start in the spring with a lot of my high school seniors is trying to cajole them into, let's just keep everything in place for first semester. And if it goes great, let's think about what we want to take out. But at least for first semester, let's try to keep everything in place that's been your support along the way too. And that feels incredibly important in terms of helping students to really succeed. So we talked a little bit about the application process, and then, into April, right? Students, your own kiddos, right, been accepted to your spot, right? So thinking about how do you get that support? And again, some of these questions that we looked at, talking with your home team, right? How will you be able to get your medications? Do you need to start setting up a new prescriber? Will you want to meet with your home therapist when you transfer? Will you want to start with a new therapist who's maybe in the area, knows the college, knows the culture? Will you do Zoom? If you do Zoom therapy, is there a place in college to do it? I literally in September talking with this kid at BC, his roommate walks by in the background in a towel. I'm just like, okay, let's find a different place to do our therapy calls, right? These are real issues, right? To start to think about, right? Sometimes college counseling centers have a space, library, thesis carols. A lot of kids use music studios, but those are other questions too. Finding out starting around April, right? What are some of the other local resources? If you do a visit day, ask the other students potentially. These kinds of questions too. Into May and June, right? Mid-May, everything really shuts down. Finals happen. The college mental health office gets real quiet after being real busy. If you call it the beginning of May, no one will answer. If you call in mid-May, by the time finals are done, everyone's cooling their heels. That's the time to reach out, whether it's to the counseling center or to other local providers, to say, hey, I'm interviewing a few therapists in your town. This is what I'm looking for. Right, they'll have a lot of time for consultation in the spring and summer after finals, and they'll be looking for something to do. So it's a really good time to start to check that out. Most people will offer you 15 or 20 minutes. We have some scripts in the book for how to email or how to reach out to a therapist, because we're also wanting our young folks to do this on their own, not just us parents, where we find ways to do this together. Getting some initial appointments set up for September, which is also hard too, because things change, right? By September, right? You thought that Thursdays at 2 would work, and you find out you've got a lab that day, or the kind of counselor you work with, they don't have that time in their schedule anymore. So you just want to think about backup, things like that. And then thinking about arriving, kind of mapping out, where's your dorm? How far is the therapist? Do I have to take an Uber? Do I have to walk or get on the subway? Right, where will I do my calls? I recommend people even use Google Maps to imagine the walk. How far is it? How do you recognize that building on the corner of campus where the counseling center is? Starting to look over syllabi in the fall. When are the finals going to be? When are the midterms going to be? Those stress points. And this is also the big adjustment for a lot of students who've had weekly assignments, daily assignments. Now for kids, especially with executive function challenges, not even ones that are going out partying, but it's I don't really have anything to do. I'm just going to delay the reading. And I'm maybe talking a bit about myself 30 years ago, but I am talking about a lot of students I work with. Oh my gosh, it's midterms. I haven't read anything, right? I'm way over my head. I'm sunk, right? So really doing that, planning out, finding those executive function coaches, if your college has them, those kinds of things too. Back in August too, that's the time to reach out to professors or advisors about your needs, but advisors are real different in college than they are in high school. But this is the time to let your professors know that you might want accommodations. And spring is the time to send, I think I skipped over that slide or it jumped, those kind of accommodations and letters from treaters in the past to ask for those accommodations for the disabilities office. Just going and saying hi, just introducing yourself, right? These kinds of things, you do them at the beginning. It'll be easier when the work hits the fan in October, November, when midterms kind of kick in. And so, again, I encourage a lot of kids, right? Script out what you want to say, right? I'm in your class. This is my major. Want to introduce myself. What do I need to do to succeed? It feels so nerdy, but it is really incredibly helpful to do those kinds of things. Starting to think too, how much do you want to disclose to your roommates, to your new friends? College, those first few weeks, it's like camp, that orientation time. You get so close to people so fast, and you want to tell them everything about your life. But then friendships change a lot by second semester. And there's that thing of like, I feel like I told everyone my life story, but maybe I'm wishing I hadn't. And so just reminding students, you don't have to share everything. You just need a couple people to know. Let your RA know. If you're on a sports team, maybe think about letting your coach know. Let some other folks know. But friendships do change a lot. And well, no one should be discriminating against you, right? Roommates are not required to do anything other than what's in the handbook, right? They can't bully you for your OCD or your anxiety or depression, but they're also, they're not supposed to get you up in the morning because you're depressed or keep the room clean because you have anxiety or whatever it might be. That's not actually part of their responsibility. But you can find these ways to ask, I think, folks, some of these questions, or what you want rather than maybe what you feel like you need. But that is part of what college is about, is advocating for ourselves, learning how to compromise when things are not going our way. Those are some of the lessons of adulthood, but they're really hard, for a lot of us, especially when we're young and haven't practiced. A lot of students, I think, they start to struggle at some point down the road. And I think, some questions too, for me, for a lot of students I work with, taking a leave of absence, right? Maybe you make it to school, but a year in, a few years in, and maybe this is a question some parents have already, is this question of taking a leave. This is the time of year, maybe a week ago when it was more the heat of finals, that a lot of students are taking their incompletes and going on leave. And there's different kinds of leave, but things to know too. There's academic leave, mental health, and medical leave. And some of these are important to know the distinctions, because you can get your money back or you can't, or you can come right back or you can't. Some schools are asking folks to, if you're taking a medical or mental health leave, again, it's actually a little bit of an open question in terms of discrimination. Can you ask students to provide a letter that they're better, if they're coming back or not? But a lot of schools still ask that, even though I think technically they're not supposed to. They only ask not because they're trying to keep you out or for their own liability, but they just want you to succeed. They really do. This came up in a number of interviews with deans that we had along the way too. But keeping that in mind too. There is such a thing as tuition insurance, which is shocking to think about, but with $100,000 a year, sometimes taking out an insurance policy on tuition might make sense if you feel like your child's a little bit more at risk. What to do on leave, what I usually recommend when students are going on leave, or parents call me and say my son or daughter is back from a leave at college, what should they do? I usually say it's important to keep busy. I like to say 20 or 30 hours a week of structured time. That can include therapy and groups and going to the gym, maybe a job, maybe a class, these kinds of things, but that they're again in that kind of structured, mostly getting up at the same time. Things like that, I think is important to maintain some structure for themselves and feel like they're moving forward, in some ways, to find something meaningful. So I know I put down 40 hours. Actually, have shifted that in the past couple of years to a little bit less than that. But it's important that people find something meaningful to do. Otherwise, I see a lot of kids go on leave and just be even more isolated, feel the FOMO, fear of missing out of their friends. Their friends from home are gone. Their friends at school are all having fun. And the depression ramps up even more, right? When we're depressed, we don't get out of bed. We don't, kind of see people. We're not taking good care of ourselves. But likewise, when we don't take care of ourselves, don't get out of bed, don't do things, we become depressed, right? So these are things to think about. Transferring is another question. It's usually a bit of a wherever you go, there you are. Although some students I know transferred to be closer to family, and that was in fact really helpful, or closer to supports. But going to a different faraway school doesn't usually make a particularly big difference. Although for some students who've experienced some kind of trauma on campus, that can be helpful, although disappointing too. If people have questions about semesters abroad and how to manage mental health on those, I can discuss that. But I think I want to keep kind of moving. Here's the gap year quote from my friend Wally at Penn. And then thinking, a little bit too. Again, it can feel like this urgency to get back and, get back into it academically and finish and see my friends. But every adult I've talked to and every student who did take time off, at least a few years later, never regretted that they took that time off, and many wish that they had taken more. Of course, it's a hard sell for someone. Going back to school, I mentioned that kind of idea of some schools want a readiness assessment, and there's tuition insurance too. So I'll maybe just finish up with sort of thinking about disclosures and then a couple words on parents and turn to questions. Time always goes by very fast. With the adults on campus, don't need to get that much beyond. With professors anyway, I'm having a mental health issue, especially if you can get some backup from deans or the accommodations office. Deans and advisors might want a few more details. Coaches, we have a lot. I saw there's a talk on student athletes, but they're well trained in mental health, but they've got other agendas oftentimes that they need a winning team, or that's what they want. So they're not always as helpful as we might want them to be, although some can be. RAs and residential life staff, chaplains, and others, they can be great to talk to, but there's not, for better or for worse, there's not confidentiality. Sometimes they are mandated to report if they're concerned about someone. Cultural centers, affinity centers can also be fantastic for kids who are maybe marginalized in some way, or have the complications of bigotry, racism, or other kinds of challenges that are making the mental health issues more complicated. And they often will know some good resources in the community, like who the good counselors on staff or nearby are, who's the great African-American therapist in town, or who speaks a different language or has a good cultural understanding. So they're really good resources to check in with too. Peers, what I like to tell kids is you only need a couple people. Not everyone in your hall needs to know. You just need a couple of good friends. Right? Don't have to tell everyone, and certainly not right away. And that kind of thing too. And then for students too, some of them haven't shared with their family. Oftentimes, when I'm talking with students directly, I'll say, maybe before you talk to your parents, you want to talk to your sibling, or who else in your family was maybe a bit of a black sheep, or do you identify with in some ways? And that can feel really empowering and helpful for students to think about how do they expand maybe their family and caregiver network as well. So I guess I'll start to kind of wind it down. Again, I've got some scripts for getting to therapy, finding a therapist, but also remembering that there are so many other adults on campus. Julie Lithcott-Hames, who I think has also spoken at GPS, the former dean of Stanford Law School, but she talks, I interviewed her and she was talking about how many people there are on campus. It's great if it's a therapist, but maybe it's the person in the financial aid office, or someone working in the cafeteria, or the trainer, or who knows what. It's a really isolated time in terms of age in college. You're only talking to people your age. So finding a few adults. For me, I was trying to stay sober when I went back to college, which was very hard. And there's this woman who worked in the dining hall who was at my 12-step meeting, and she'd be like, "Hey, Chris, how you doing?" I'd be like, "Hey, Lorraine, how you doing?" And it was so meaningful and helpful to have that just other adult kind of around who I could check in with. And I had a therapist and I had other people in my life too. But these things were really important and helpful for me. And I think encouraging students to find those other adults in their life too. The therapeutic ones, and just the student support professionals, and just the other people kind of around campus too, just to think about. Even fraternities, I've actually been impressed in Greek life with such a negative reputation. One of my kid on my caseload, I'm actually seeing him later today, but he was like the chaplain for his fraternity. He's like, it's kind of like being the therapist. Like, you kind of just like making sure everyone's okay. It's like, that's really sweet that exists in some of these communities that I know I have some stereotypes about. So that's also helpful to see. I'm gonna wind it down. I have a lot of slides about self-care, and just reminding parents that this is a time that you're kind of moving from, as my friend says, from manager to consultant. that you want to swoop in and solve, as Julie said, but what you want to really do is empathize and empower. Not, if they say, what classes should I take? It's like, I've got ideas, but I want you to ask around. Like, you should be checking with your peers, right? That kind of thing. And for parents too, like, the empty nest thing is hard, right? Our identity is based on being parents for the last 18 years. And now we're giving that up, or we're parents in a very different way. And so we should be careful about just picking up the phone when we're bored. And we love to give advice and we love hearing from them. But I think one good conversation with your kid also is to talk through a bit. How much should we be in touch? I will call you on Sunday if I don't hear from you during the week, or whatever it might be. And I think talking a bit about mental health, and again, I can share resources and red flags too. A lot of schools are doing a nice job of orienting parents with questions to talk to your kid about during that first October break home, and that kind of thing. And when they reach out, they really need you to be steady, not overreacting. In terms of, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to drive right down, but that kind of, what's the rule I've heard, that the 3 H's, right? Do you want help, in terms of advice, which is sometimes not what they want? Do you want to be heard, right? Which is just, space to listen. Or the last H, right? Do you want a hug? And that's harder over the phone. But sometimes we can kind of remember that too. And never give up, right? That was the advice that my parents were given when I was having a very hard time, by a therapist who said, never give up. And I actually had an amazing experience where I just reconnected with that therapist of my parents from 30 years ago, because he's on the faculty at Harvard Med also. And I said, you helped my parents 30 years ago, and I've been sober for decades, and you said never give up, and I didn't. And I just wanted to thank you. And got a very sweet email back from him last spring. So never give up. And back to my story, it took me 6 years with multiple leaves of absence to graduate from college with a 2.09 GPA, and got rejected from a few grad schools, and then finished my doctorate in 4 years, won teaching awards, written 20 books at this point, and I'm doing all right. So please never give up on your kiddos. And that is, to me, the main takeaway. And I will hang out for some Q&A. I see there's questions in the chat. If you want the slides, I think that QR code works. I can't guarantee it. And my email is up here. My website is up here. If you want to ask me a more private question offline, or if you want to send me a private chat, if you don't want the whole group to hear your question on Zoom, I'm totally comfortable with that too. So just we'll shift over at this point then. Whoops, that's not what I'm trying to do here. To questions.
And enter them in the Q&A. If you do have a question, I have a question, but you've just, so many questions I had, you covered. This is just a great book. I never thought that a book of questions could be so helpful, because there are so many things that one might not think about. And if you do take a look and see, oh, well, this is something that we just never imagined that this is something we should have explored, how valuable it can be in the moment. So, can you spend another minute talking about how that changing role of parents, how it needs to go from that to consultant? Tell us, because is that not the hardest thing of all?
It's so hard. This is my friend Sam Himmelstein, who's a great presenter too. But he was like, you start as the boss, and then you become the manager, into the tween and teen years, then you shift into the consultant role. And it's really hard to then like step back, because to me, I think so much of our identity is, it's like, I was folding laundry this morning. It's like, I kind of love folding laundry for my kids, but really they should learn to do it themselves, right? I kind of love cooking for them, but if I don't teach them how to cook, they're not going to learn how to cook too. And how do we step back is really hard. And I think finding, then I actually have a client right now whose son's a senior, And he said, I'm here. I said, what are you doing in therapy? You seem fine. He said, well, my son's going to college and I just really want to make sure I have a life after he goes to college. I was like, that's great. Like, so I'm working with him about what does he want to do? What are his goals for this kind of time in his life? And he and his wife to kind of, connect and reconnect and knowing that it is actually a very hard time for couples and caregivers. The other thing that came up in some of the interviews I did, was blended families, divorced families. What are the challenges there if you're a step parent and there's a child having a mental health crisis, or how do you hold your marriage together? You're making different decisions, if you're divorced or you're together, about the kinds of supports that your child needs. I mean, the awful, horrendous news, right, in terms of what happened to the Reiners, but thinking about an absolutely awful situation, but how much strain that puts on a marriage when parents are thinking, should we be, one parent thinks tough love, the other thinks more soft love, and the conflict that creates on the couple, and you add divorce onto that, or you add a blended family or step families or step parents into that. It's incredibly complicated. And so I encourage you to find hobbies, get support, find other parents, find other things to do that you love, rediscover things, take that cooking class, take that vacation. Those are important, but also really finding ways to think about how you can be as supportive to your child while really encouraging them to find those supports. So this is also the time of, okay, we've got to get probably everyone's tearing their hair out trying to get their kids to get their applications done these next few weeks, right? Merry holidays, right? But thinking, those other things of, encouraging their independence. In terms of like, this can also be a time that's sort of fun in terms of like, well, let's learn how to do laundry together. Let's learn how to change a tire together. Let's learn how to call a therapist together. Let's learn how to pick up your prescription together. Let's learn the disaster that is American health insurance, to navigate that system together. And that can be sometimes fun, sometimes not fun, but it's a way to actually stay connected with your kid as you do these things and learn these things. But really what they need is for you to be steady and not overreact, but remind them that that they can do it. Right. To me, that's the message that I think some generations didn't get. And I think we're coming back to that in a really good way is, I know you can do this, right? What's the podcast? We can do hard things, right? It can be incredibly hard. This can be scary. The anxiety can be overwhelming, but I know you can do it. And that we remind them that we know that they have the strength to do it. And we are there in the background, and that there are other supports too for them, which is hard for us to like say, go seek out other supports. We want them to call us, but that is what they need. And the more we do that, actually, the more they send the Mother's Day card, they come home for the holidays, than if we push too hard to hold on. It really is when we let them go through their time of independence that they really come back to connect at the other side. I truly believe that. I've seen it, and the research backs it up too. So, yeah.
That is the $64,000 question, that balance about not overdoing, and you talk about Julie. I remember Julie, I say this all the time. I think about her words about when it becomes our success because we've done it, then you're denying them the opportunity to feel let
Yeah.
it be their success. Just really quickly, friendships. You talked about how difficult because of COVID, because of social media, the isolation, friendships are just hard. And now that they're out of our house, or even while they're in, what do you want to say about that?
Yeah. Friendships for the adults or for the kids?
Let's focus on the kids on this question.
Yeah. It takes time. It takes time to put yourself out there. I see so many people who just struggle with friendships first semester. This is where actually just encouraging kids to go full on with the orientations, even the optional ones, they will really build a foundation of other kids to hang out with. Finding some of those common interests. It is awkward as heck to go to the activities fair and try to meet people, but show up for hall snacks, show up for the activities fair. These kinds of things, I think, are really important to do, even though it's really hard. And it is so much easier to hide in your room on these things, rather than get yourself out there. And also knowing that it will be hard to stay in touch with their old friends, too, that's going to be tough, but that it can be this opportunity to connect around new interests and things like that. But it takes time. A lot of kids, it looks like they're making friends right away. Everyone else is hanging out, right? And then realizing, what's the kind of saying, don't compare your insides to other people's outsides, right? Everyone is so insecure that first semester, right? It's not just you. They're looking at you thinking you have it together because you're, rushing out the door to meet up with everybody. It's technically a fire hazard in colleges, but like leave your door open and people will wander in and wander by, and you'll hear them heading to the dining hall on day one, and join the throng, and that kind of thing I think can be helpful for making those friends. And you don't need these friends forever. You just need someone to go to the dining hall with, and then you will have new friends by second semester anyway. But starting out can feel real hard for sure. Yeah.
As we're closing, just, I remember when you were with us last, we did a short clip about sort of takeaway for kids, a takeaway for parents, on this topic of emotional mental health through these transitions. Give me some closing words about what you want to say to a child and what you want to say to their parent.
Whew, oh, you wish you give me the heads up on this one. I think for parents, I think trust that your kid can handle this. Be there in the background, but not the helicopter, right? Just let them know that you are always there, when they need you. But when they do reach out for help, just to kind of, like send it back to them. Like, where on campus can you get help? Who have you met that might have that advice too? Like, I've got my thoughts, but tell me what other people think. I think that kind of conversation is really helpful because it encourages them to then get out there. And for students, I think as you go off, have fun, certainly. And the things that are hard about college are often not the things that we expect to be hard about that time. But the most success comes if you keep the supports in place for at least that first semester. Don't decide, I don't need this anymore, I'm 18, I'm a grown-up. Please keep them in place for that first semester, and then peel them off over time. Yeah. And even if like freshman and sophomore year you had a therapist, then you're doing better. Senior year, maybe check back in with that therapist. Hey, I'm going off to college, do you have any advice for me? Can we maybe be in touch? That first week in September also, just so you have some other adult who's in your corner, can be really helpful too. Yeah.
In my thanks to you, I think I have every single one of your books. And what I'm impressed
That's like 20.
about you is that your books cover the whole lifespan, because I purchased that Alpha Breaths book for so many young children, learning about the ABCs and the alligators and now here you are still helping families as we have our emerging adults. And I'm really grateful for all of your work, your heart and your passion. You've really made a difference, and I'm so grateful.
Well, the work that you do for, used to be, the Chicago area community, and now the whole world, it's amazing. And one of the good things that came out of the pandemic is some of this shift to online. And I hope we hang out in person again at some point. But thank you for having me and the work that you do. And thank you, parents and educators watching. You're doing a lot for your kid. What can I do for my kid? You can learn, you can educate yourself, you can show up for parent series like this. Yeah, absolutely.
We need to get educated. This is often where we go hug the kids, and so let's go hug the kids.
All right. Thank you,
My
Gilda.
thanks to you and to everyone. Take care.